In the summer of 1911, the folk of Chatsworth, nestled deep in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, began reporting encounters with something that defied all reason. The county sheriff, a man named Henderson, dismissed the first reports as sunstroke or too much corn whiskey, until men who had lived in the Barrens their whole lives packed their traps and left good cranberry harvest wages behind. They all described the same thing, watching from the deep shadows of the pines, something that understood their routines, knew the paths they walked, and waited with the patience of a thinking mind. It began with a sound, a shriek that was not of this world. I remember that summer clear as day, though the years have since blurred much else. My hands, gnarled and thick-knuckled now, still recall the feel of an axe handle, the pull of a trap line. My eyes, faded blue, still carry the image of what I saw, what we all saw, in the deep, humid stillness of August. I was a young man then, lean and strong, knowing the Barrens like the back of my own hand. I read tracts like scripture, felt the shift in the wind before the leaves rustled. But nothing, not a lifetime spent wrestling with the wild, prepared me for the quiet, profound terror that settled over Chatsworth. The air that August was a thick, wet blanket, clinging to skin and clothes, heavy with the scent of pine needles, damp earth, and the distant, sweet promise of blueberry season. Chatsworth itself was a scattering of weathered clapboard houses, huddled close to the dirt roads that turned to dust in dry spells and to slick mud after the swift summer storms. Our church steeple seemed to strain against the omnipresent tree line, a constant reminder of the endless labyrinth of stunted pitch pines and gnarled oak that pressed in on all sides. It was a place where people knew their neighbors, where gossip traveled faster than the mail, and where, on most evenings, the rhythmic drone of cicadas was the loudest sound. But that year, the cicadas went quiet. Not all at once, not with a sudden silence that would have been its own warning. No, it was a slow, creeping hush that began in the deeper woods and drifted closer with each passing day. A silence that felt wrong, a heavy blanket laid over the usual symphony of the wild. Even the hoot of an owl, usually a comfort in the dark, seemed to carry an edge of something else, a question unanswered. The oppressive heat of the summer made every shadow deeper, every sound more significant, every breath a struggle against an unseen weight. We were a small community, bound by the Barrens, by hard work and simple lives. There was Samuel Briggs, a farmer of 50 years, broad-shouldered and weathered, with hands like spades and a perpetual scowl that belied a deep-seated pragmatism. He wore practical overalls and work shirts, perpetually smudged with earth. Samuel believed in common sense, in the observable world. He'd dismiss a strange sound as a coyote and a tall tale as a fever dream. Next to him, you had Thomas Reed, the town's esteemed banker, a man in his early 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his spectacles glinting. He was meticulous, precise, held logic above all else. His hands were soft, unused to manual labor, and his voice was always measured, calm. He believed in ledgers, interest rates, verifiable facts. Then there was Margaret Holloway, the schoolteacher, 35 years old, her spectacles perched on a slender nose. Her sensible dresses never quite hid the spark of curiosity in her eyes. Her dark brown hair was always neat, pulled into a practical bun. She was quiet, perhaps a little too bookish for Chatsworth's tastes, but respected for her sharp mind and unwavering kindness. Margaret read widely, not just scripture, and had a passing familiarity with regional folklore, old wives' tales. What others dismissed as quaint, she considered history, echoes of things past. And of course, Caleb, barely 18, a wiry stable hand working for Briggs, straw-colored hair perpetually falling into his bright, curious eyes, a perpetually dirty face, ripped trousers. He moved with the restless eagerness of a young dog, quick to laugh, quicker to dismiss old stories as nonsense. Full of youthful bravado and boundless energy, he believed himself immune to old fears, ready with a joke about boogeymen and shadow stalkers. The first sign that something was truly amiss, beyond the unnatural quiet, was a smell. It was faint at first, carried on the humid air from the deeper woods, an acrid tang that reminded me of burnt copper mixed with something else, something resinous and foul. Not the smell of a forest fire, not quite. It was wrong. It was a smell I couldn't place, and that bothered me more than anything. I knew every scent of the barrens, every animal, every plant. This was new. It was Margaret Holloway who bore witness to the beginning of the end of our quiet lives. The sun was just dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, when she walked home from the weekly church social. The social had been a lively affair, full of hymns and gossip and Mrs. Henderson's famous peach cobbler. Margaret, a quiet woman, had enjoyed the gentle hum of conversation, the rare opportunity to feel a part of the community beyond her schoolroom. She walked alone, as was her habit, preferring the quiet contemplation of the twilight. The dirt road, softened by the day's heat, stretched ahead of her, winding between the encroaching pines. She was nearing the bend where the old cranberry bog used to be, now just a stagnant pool choked with reeds, when the cicadas, those few that had remained, fell utterly silent. The air grew heavy, not just with humidity, but with an unnatural stillness that pressed in on her ears. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot, ceased. Margaret stopped, her hand instinctively going to the small locket at her throat. A prickle, cold and sharp, ran down her spine. The smell was stronger here, the metallic tang now undeniable, sickening. And then it came, a sound that ripped through the twilight, tearing the silence to shreds. It wasn't a human scream, nor the cry of any beast I had ever heard. It was something primal, ancient, a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the bones. It was a shriek of pure malevolence, a sound of unspeakable suffering and unimaginable power, echoing through the pines, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It went right through her, Margaret would say later, leaving her breathless, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stood frozen, eyes wide, scanning the darkening sky. The last sliver of sun was vanishing, leaving only a faint glow on the western horizon. And then, against that dying light, she saw it. Not an owl, not a bat, not even one of the great herons from the bogs. This was colossal, a massive winged shadow, 12 feet across, blacker than the gathering night. It glided, silent and impossibly fast, just above the treetops, its wings beating with a terrible, slow power that seemed to ripple the very air. Its body, from what little she could discern in the fleeting moment, was like that of a horse, but twisted, elongated, a grotesque mockery. And its head, she couldn't make out details, only that it was far more sinister than any animal, a shape of pure malice, turning as if it sensed her presence, its unseen gaze falling upon her. The shadow passed overhead, blotting out the last of the bruised sky for a terrifying instant, before vanishing into the deeper, impenetrable darkness of the barrens. The shriek died, leaving a ringing silence that was almost worse than the sound itself. Margaret Holloway stood there, trembling, for what felt like an eternity, the metallic stench burning in her nostrils, the image of that monstrous shadow seared into her mind. She stumbled into town, pale and breathless, her sensible bun askew, her spectacles fogged with tears. She found me by the general store, talking with Samuel Briggs and Thomas Reed. Her voice, usually so clear and steady, was a terrified whisper as she recounted her tale. "It wasn't an owl, Elias," she insisted, her slender fingers clutching my sleeve, her eyes darting nervously towards the darkening pines. "It was huge, like a horse, but with wings. And it screamed. Oh God, it screamed." Briggs, ever the pragmatist, scoffed first. "Margaret, it was twilight, your eyes playing tricks, maybe a heron, startled by a fox." Reed, ever the logical man, adjusted his spectacles. "Perhaps a large bird, Miss Holloway. The light can be deceptive, and sound carries strangely in the barrens." But I saw the truth in her eyes. I saw the genuine terror. I had heard the shriek myself, faint and distant, but unmistakable. It had sent a shiver down my own spine, a feeling of deep, unsettling wrongness. Caleb, who had been leaning against the porch, listening with a smirk, had his grin falter, a flicker of unease crossing his young face. "It wasn't a bird, Samuel," Margaret whispered, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "It was evil, and it was watching me." Her account was met with a mixture of disbelief, nervous laughter from a few idlers, and a deep, unsettling unease that began to spread through the town like a slow-burning fire. People murmured, glancing towards the woods, towards the place where the sun had just set, leaving only a bruised, silent sky. The cicadas remained quiet. The smell, though faint, lingered on the humid air. That night, sleep did not come easy to Chatsworth. Every creak of a floorboard, every rustle of the wind through the pines, was magnified. The lingering sound of that impossible shriek seemed to hang in the air, a phantom note of pure dread. And out there, in the deepening darkness, something vast and unknown moved, a clear sign that normalcy had shattered and the forgotten legends of the Pine Barrens had woken, patient and terrible. The days that followed were a slow burn of dread, each sunrise bringing no relief, only the stark knowledge that the thing was still out there. The quiet of Chatsworth was gone, replaced by a nervous hum, the constant murmur of anxious voices. No one slept soundly. Doors were barred, windows shuttered tight, but a shriek could still tear through glass, and claw marks had proven wood no barrier. The smell, that acrid, metallic tang, seemed to hang in the air even when nothing was happening, a phantom reminder. The town, once a place of predictable rhythms, became a place of jumpy shadows and whispered fears. People spoke in hushed tones, their eyes constantly darting towards the deep, dark line of the pines that ringed our settlement. The children, usually running wild, clung to their mothers' skirts, their games silenced, their laughter replaced by whimpers at every sudden noise. The very air felt heavy, like a storm that refused to break, promising only more terror. Samuel Briggs, after finding his coop a slaughterhouse, had become a different man. The skepticism had been burned out of him, replaced by a grim, furious resolve. He walked with his jaw perpetually clenched, his eyes scanning the tree line, a rifle never far from his reach. He wasn't afraid to admit he was scared, but he was more than that, he was outraged. This thing had invaded his home, destroyed his livelihood, and mocked his understanding of the natural world. Thomas Reed, on the other hand, was still wrestling with his disbelief, though the fight was clearly costing him. The banker, a man of ledgers and verifiable facts, saw his world crumbling. He spoke less, his usual calm voice now strained. His hands, so accustomed to counting coin, now trembled slightly. He'd scoffed at Margaret's story, then dismissed the coop as a large bear, even rationalized the Weatherby incident as a falling tree limb in high winds, anything to cling to logic. But the sheer improbability of it all, the mounting evidence, was a poison seeping into his ordered mind. It was gnawing at him, tearing at the fabric of his reason. He needed proof, or perhaps he needed to disprove it once and for all. He needed to confront it, to see it with his own eyes, to apply his sharp, logical mind to the problem and find the rational explanation that surely existed. It was a desperate gambit, born of intellectual pride and a rising, suffocating fear. The old iron furnace ruins lay deep in the pines, a skeleton of stone and rusted metal, swallowed by the forest decades ago. It was a place few ventured, a silent monument to a forgotten industry, where the pines grew particularly dense and the shadows were always long, even at noon. Reed, driven by some desperate need to reclaim his sense of order, decided to go there. He told no one, slipping away just before dusk, a sturdy lantern in one hand, a small pistol more for comfort than defense, in the other. He thought if he could just times see times something tangible, he could finally put a name to it, give it a place in his world. The path to the furnace was overgrown, the air thick and still, heavy with the smell of damp earth and ancient iron. The cicadas, those few brave enough to sing, fell silent as he approached. The ruins loomed, dark and skeletal against the deepening twilight, the gnarled branches of pines reaching like bony fingers towards the bruised sky. Reed's heart hammered a rhythm against his ribs he couldn't ignore. He walked through the crumbling archway, his lantern casting, dancing, uncertain shadows that seemed to writhe and mock him. He could feel it then, the prickle on his skin, the sense of being watched. The acrid smell was stronger here, burning in his nostrils, a thick, cloying presence that clung to the air. He raised his lantern higher, his eyes scanning the skeletal remains of the furnace, the crumbling walls, the dark crevices. Nothing, just shadows. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, a shaky, desperate sound. He was about to turn, to admit defeat, to return to his logical, explainable world, when a subtle shift in the shadows caught his eye. Not a movement, but a time's presence, asterisk. Perched atop the highest stone archway, silhouetted against the last faint glow of the western sky, was the creature. It was immense, even from a distance, its form dark and indistinct, but undeniably there. It wasn't moving, just sitting, watching. Reed froze, his lantern trembling in his hand, casting a weak, insufficient circle of light, his breath hitched in his throat. Then, slowly, deliberately, the creature turned its head. 2 points of light, like glowing embers, ignited in the darkness where its eyes should have been, not reflecting the lantern light, but radiating their own faint, malevolent glow. They were fixed on him, unblinking, utterly still, and in those eyes, Thomas Reed, the logical banker, saw not the feral gaze of an animal, but an intelligence, an ancient, terrible intelligence. It was calculating, cold, utterly indifferent to his terror. And for a fleeting, horrifying instant, as the creature tilted its head slightly, Reed perceived something else, something even worse than its monstrous form or its glowing eyes. He saw a wrong smile in the set of its unseen jaw, a hint of ancient amusement, a profound, chilling malevolence that knew him, understood him, and found him utterly insignificant. It was the look of a predator toying with its prey, but far more sinister than any beast. It was the look of something that had seen generations of men come and go, something that understood the fleeting nature of their lives, their beliefs, their logic. It was an ancient, patient evil, and it was mocking him. Reed didn't scream. He couldn't. The sound was trapped in his throat, a frozen knot of pure terror. He simply stood there, locked in that terrible gaze, his mind shattering, piece by agonizing piece. His lantern slipped from his grasp, hitting the sandy ground with a dull thud, plunging him into deeper darkness, leaving only the 2 burning embers in the gloom. He didn't remember how long he stood there, or how he eventually stumbled away from the ruins, away from those knowing eyes. He only remembered the profound, absolute terror and the crushing realization that everything he believed, everything he understood, was a fragile lie. When he finally stumbled back into Chatsworth, hours later, long after midnight, he was a broken man. His clothes were torn, his face pale and streaked with dirt and tears, his eyes wide and vacant, staring at something none of us could see. He tried to speak, but only choked. Incoherent sounds emerged. It took Samuel Briggs, holding him steady, to piece together the fragments of his terror. Reed never spoke of the creature again, not clearly. He just sat, staring, his mind irrevocably shattered. He became a living ghost, a stark warning of the psychological toll the unknown could exact. There was no more skepticism after that. Thomas Reed, the man of reason, was undone. The fear in Chatsworth turned to outright panic. The creature was no longer a phantom. It was a knowing, malevolent presence, and it had shown its face, or at least its eyes, to one of their own. Samuel Briggs, his face grim, his jaws set like granite, wasted no time. "We hunt it," he declared, his voice a low rumble. "We hunt it now, before it takes more than our chickens and our sanity." Armed search parties were organized. Every able-bodied man in Chatsworth, and some not so able, grabbed a rifle, a lantern, or a pitchfork. The desperation was palpable. They weren't just hunting a beast. They were fighting for their very existence, for their understanding of the world. Briggs led them, his broad shoulders squared, his rifle held tight. Caleb, his youthful bravado replaced by a pale, determined set to his face, joined with his own rifle, no longer joking about boogeymen. I was there too, of course. I knew the Barrens better than any of them, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this hunt would be unlike any other. The line of men, flickering lanterns casting small, desperate pools of light, moved slowly into the dense, oppressive darkness of the Pine Barrens. The air was thick, heavy, pressing in on us. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl, sent a jolt of adrenaline through the ranks. We moved through the gnarled pines, their stunted forms like twisted sentinels, the sandy soil soft beneath our boots, swallowing the sound of our footsteps. The Barrens swallowed our light, swallowed our courage. The deeper we went, the more the trees seemed to close in, forming a labyrinth of shadows and whispering branches. We called out, our voices swallowed by the vastness, our shouts sounding small and foolish against the ancient silence. We found tracks, of course, those unmistakable three-toed prints gouged deep into the sand, just as they had been at Briggs's coop. They led from a thicket, across a small clearing, and then vanished. Simply vanished. We'd follow another set, deeper in, only to have them disappear again, or worse, lead us in a wide, mocking circle back to where we'd started. It was playing with us, toying with us, like a cat with a mouse. It knew every path, every hidden bog, every secret of the woods. We were trespassers in its domain. A sudden snap of a branch in the darkness would send rifles clattering to shoulders, men freezing, straining their eyes into the impenetrable blackness. But there was never anything there, just the wind, or a small animal, or our own terrified imaginations. Then, from somewhere far off, a shriek would cut through the night faint, mocking, a terrible echo of Margaret Holloway's first encounter. It would send a collective shiver down our spines, a reminder that it was watching, always watching. Caleb, once so full of fire, grew quiet, his eyes wide, constantly darting. He clutched his rifle so hard, his knuckles were white. He was no longer looking for adventure. He was looking for escape. The Barrens, once a playground, had become a tomb. We pushed on through the night, our exhaustion growing, our hope dwindling. Lanterns began to flicker out, their oil spent. Our faces were streaked with sweat and dirt, our eyes bloodshot, our muscles aching. We were small, vulnerable specks against the ancient trees, our flimsy weapons useless against an enemy we couldn't see, couldn't track, couldn't comprehend. The crushing realization settled over us, heavy and cold as the night air. This wasn't a hunt. We weren't the hunters. We were the hunted. And whatever this thing was, it knew us. It understood our fear, and it held a patience that stretched back through generations. We were pushed to our limits, our understanding shattered, our very humanity feeling fragile against the immense, ancient power that simply times was asterisk. The second night of the hunt was no different from the first, only heavier. The humid air, already thick enough to chew, grew dense with the scent of fear and sweat, mingling with the ever-present pine and damp earth. Our lanterns, once a defiant challenge against the dark, now seemed pitiful, small sparks swallowed by an infinite blackness. The Barrens themselves seemed to breathe around us, a living, watching entity. Every twisted branch became a lurking shape, every rustle of leaves a whispered threat. It wasn't just the monster we fought now, it was the woods, closing in, pressing down. We stumbled through tangles of briars that tore at our clothes and skin, through stagnant bogs where the water sucked at our boots, threatening to swallow us whole. The sandy paths, so familiar in daylight, became a bewildering maze in the moonless night. The creatures' tracks would appear, clear as day, leading us deeper, only to vanish at the edge of a thicket, or worse, lead us back to a point we'd already passed, mocking our efforts. It was a game, and we were losing. Briggs, the pragmatic farmer, his face a mask of grim exhaustion, pushed us on. But even his resolute shoulders seemed to slump with each futile turn. Caleb, the young stable hand, was a ghost of his former self. His rifle hung heavy in his hands, his eyes wide, reflecting only the frantic flicker of the lantern. He had stopped talking, stopped joking. His youthful arrogance had been flayed away, leaving behind a raw, trembling vulnerability. He wasn't looking for adventure anymore. He was looking for a way out. I walked with them, but I felt apart. I knew these woods, every whispering pine, every treacherous bog. And what I knew was that this thing wasn't just Times the Barrens. It was Times the Barrens, or at least a part of them, as ancient and inherent as the sand itself. I started to see the hunt not as a pursuit, but as a test. The creature was not running from us. It was observing, gauging our fear, our resolve, our limitations. It was letting us wear ourselves down, letting the woods do its work. Dawn came, not as a glorious break of light, but as a slow, grudging seep through the pines, painting the world in shades of bruised purple and sickly gray. We emerged from the barrens, a ragged procession of exhausted men, our clothes torn, our faces grim, our spirits broken. We had found nothing, no body, no lair. Only the fading, impossible tracks and the chilling certainty that we had been played. The creatures' visits stopped as abruptly as they had begun. One morning, the town simply awoke to silence. No shattered coops, no cracked roofs, no terrifying shrieks. The metallic, acrid smell that had clung to the air was gone, replaced by the familiar scent of pine and humid earth. The cicadas returned, their rhythmic drone a comfort, though it now seemed to carry a faint, uneasy undertone. The fear, however, remained. It settled over Chatsworth like the summer humidity, thick and inescapable. The official reports, when they finally came, dismissed the incidents as a series of unfortunate animal attacks, a rogue bear, perhaps, or a pack of wild dogs exacerbated by mass hysteria brought on by the oppressive heat. They spoke of misinterpreted tracks and overactive imaginations. They rationalized what could not be rationalized, explaining away the impossible with bland, official words. But those who had seen, those who had heard, knew better. They knew the truth was far more terrible than any official explanation. Thomas Reed, the banker, never recovered. He would sit by his window, staring out at the distant tree line, his eyes vacant, his mind lost in the horror he had witnessed. He was a constant, silent reminder of the price of looking into those ember-like eyes. Margaret Holloway, the schoolteacher, continued her lessons, but her quiet strength was now tinged with a permanent shadow. Her initial encounter had changed her from an observer of local folklore to a keeper of a terrible, undeniable truth. She moved with a quiet resignation, her gaze often drifting towards the dark edges of the pines. Samuel Briggs, the farmer, returned to his fields, his back straighter, his jaw tighter than ever. He worked harder, spoke less, his pragmatism hardened into a grim resolve against a world he now knew held unspeakable things. Caleb, the young stable hand, left Chatsworth altogether within a month. He just packed a small bag and walked out, his eyes haunted, never looking back. He was one of many. Chatsworth was forever changed. Some families, like Caleb, packed up their lives and moved away, seeking solace in towns further from the shadow of the barrens, hoping to forget. Others stayed, rooted to their land, but they were different. They never quite forgot the terror of August 1911. They learned to live with the knowledge that something ancient and malevolent resided just beyond their lamplight. They listened more closely to the wind in the pines, to the rustle of unseen things in the deep woods. They taught their children the old legends, not as quaint tales, but as warnings, their voices low, their eyes wary. Decades have passed since those harrowing nights. The world has changed, Chatsworth has changed, but the Pine Barrens, they remain, unchanged, untamed, just as they always were. And so does the knowledge I carry, a heavy, quiet burden that never truly leaves me. I've seen many things in my long life, trapped many beasts, weathered many storms, but nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to those 4 nights in 1911. What happened then wasn't a random act of savagery. It was a message, a reminder. We were not at the top of the chain, not the masters of our domain. We were just visitors, tolerated only so long as we didn't disturb the true, ancient occupants. The creature was never defeated. It was never even truly understood. It simply returned, back to its deep slumber, to its hidden places, to the dark heart of the barrens, waiting with that same infinite patience I saw in its glowing eyes, the same chilling intelligence that mocked Thomas Reed. It had tested us, found us wanting, and then simply dismissed us, returning to its vigil. And it is still there. I know it. I feel it. When the cicadas fall silent for no reason, when the air grows heavy with an unidentifiable scent, when the wind through the pines sounds less like a whisper and more like a groan, I feel its presence. It is an unseen watcher, a silent guardian of an ancient domain. It waits for the next generation, the next group of foolish humans, to disturb its slumber, to forget the lessons of the past. It waits for the cycle to begin anew. Because in the Pine Barrens, some things don't die. They don't leave. They simply times our asterisk, and they remember, always.